Melissa, welcome to Graphic Tales. I'm really excited to talk to you. This is Melissa Tanner. You are well, you know what? Why am I introducing you? Why don't you tell people who you are and what you do?
So as he said, my name's Melissa Tanner. I'm the founder and lead investigator for TNT Paranormal Investigators. We started in Chicago in 2009, and then in 2015 moved to Orlando and was active down there. And then last year I moved back to my hometown of Missouri. So now I live in Southwest Missouri. So kind of been a little bit all over the country. Besides doing podcasts, when people invite me to come, I also do a lot of presentations, and I probably presented over 200 times at different libraries, lodges, old folks' homes that want someone to come and talk about something. That basically, we have about 7 or 8 different programs we have, and it's mainly about education. So I focus a lot on the education side of paranormal. So we can span out into that, Rob, in a little bit. And we do have a website. We do have Instagram, Facebook, all the usual social medias. We don't do a lot. If we do have a client investigation, you're not going to see a lot of videos of us because we keep that confidential for the clients. We don't like to publish their information. So we try to keep a lot of stuff more on the DL, but we do have pretty active list of things to do. So that's kind of me. I do this as on the weekends, and people say as like a hobby or whatever. I guess it still takes a lot of my time, but I actually work in IT during the day, so I've got a technology background.
Yeah, I guess a lot of people do consider it a hobby, which is funny because I talk to so many people that the hobby overtakes their lives, yet they still call it a hobby with this.
Yeah.
You've been doing it a while now. For, like you said, you started TNT Paranormal Investigations. What made you start this?
Well, and prior to doing TNT, I was actually part of 2 other groups, and I just kind of wanted to run my own show, and so that I branched off in 2009 to start this team. But honestly, I had experience as a kid, and I've got stories I can share from when I was a kid, but I'll be real honest, it was seeing the ghost hunter guys on Sci-Fi, ghost hunter guys and gals on Sci-Fi Channel, and just seeing what they were doing. And I like to help people. I'm very big about helping support the community. And so I wanted to see if I could help people either get over their fears, find answers, or whatever. And so when I saw that they did this, I was like, wait, there's teams like this out there. There's other people that have an interest. And I started researching and found a team and was with them about a year or so, and then switched to another team. So there wasn't like one thing. Like, we've had people join us where there was like that one aha moment. And I really didn't have that. I mean, like I said, I'm back home now. So I grew up in Southwest Missouri. We're an old lead mining town. So there were always, urban legends, and there were, not that we're very big at urban, it's a very small town, but you know what I mean? Like, there was the around the water cooler stories and things like that. And so I always had an interest, and I'm a fortunate enough person where I grew up with great grandparents. My great grandparents were young enough when I was young. They took us places. And so my great grandma we'd go by a cemetery, and she'd tell me a story about that cemetery. Or we had a lot of Civil War battles around here as well. And she would tell us some story, around it. Sometimes I think to try to scare me or poke fun, but I think sometimes it really was like a story she had heard. And so we have quite a few places near us that are, have had a lot of activity. I have a good friend who grew up in a house that had a lot of activity, and I'm sure she could tell us stories that would just really freak us out. But anyway, it was fun. On Sundays after church, they would take us around the countryside, and she would every once in a while point out, such and such happened here, or they've seen a ghost on a horse here, and things like that. And so that interest was there. And then that was my father's side. My mother's side, I'm guessing my great grandma was psychic, but because it's a small town, people called her a witch. And I think she might have had abilities that people couldn't explain, so they called her that. But So there was always kind of that, family stories about her and things that had happened or they saw or experienced. And so I think it would just kind of spark that interest of the unknown. And to be honest with you, I only focus on spirit activity and entities, as we call them. I don't deal with UFOs or cryptides. If we were to get someone to ask us something about that, I'd give it to a team that's experienced. So as far as the paranormal world, we definitely stick more to the afterlife and what are those bangs I'm hearing in my walls kind of thing.
Sure, sure. Now, you told other people having stories, but have you ever seen like a full body apparition or anything?
Yeah, so I call myself a skeptical believer. So I'm skeptic of things I hear and I want to see it for myself. And the answer is yes. I have reviewed audio that I was present that I know for a fact that that voice wasn't there. In the earlier days of the team, I had mostly women, and we would get a male voice come on, and I was in the room when it happened. And so then when you hear the audio, you're like, whoa, wait a minute, what was that? But I've definitely seen, shadow figures. Been to Waverly Hills several times. That's in Louisville, Kentucky. Lots of shadow figures there, and seeing other, things that have happened. And I've had experiences I can't explain, like things that have happened to me, mostly on investigations, but things happened that I just can't get my mind around how could that have happened because I was aware of the entire situation. And we do very controlled investigations. Like we take readings before we start, we document everything. Every team member wears a recorder. So I can filter out a lot of the junk that can happen. And so there's been a lot of things that I've had happen to me personally that I can't explain, and so then I have to lean towards it's got to be paranormal in nature.
Sure. So you were you're talking about your team. I know TNT's been doing this for quite a while now. What would you say is one of the standout stories that TNT has gathered that you're like, oh yeah, whenever we talk, this is the one I got to tell people.
So yeah, it's a rather interesting story. So I'm sure most of your listeners have seen the movie Shawshank Redemption, which
Oh
is
yeah.
based on a Stephen King novel, and it was filmed partly at a prison in Ohio, in Mansfield, Ohio, called Ohio State Reformatory. So it was 2011 in June. Me and some of my team met another team that I was familiar with in Chicago. We met up there at Mansfield. And you can do a day tour and kind of, they give you the layout and you see all the stuff from the movie, like you see the warden's quarters and, all that kind of stuff. So you kind of gives you the layout. So we knew where we were at the location and time. And it was me and two other females. And I had a camcorder on me that could film with night vision. So that means it can film in the dark. And we had gone up to a room that was above the, what was the chapel at the time when the prison was open. So where they would have held, services and stuff for church and things. And so right above that was a whole entire area that was kind of closed off. You could only get to it from this spiral staircase. And it was where they kept a lot of the ill patients that were there at the prison. So if you got tuberculosis, you would get segregated up there. If you had, maybe some other flu that was pretty contagious, or if you had maybe even cancer, they would put them up there and, keep them separate from the rest of the population. So they, wouldn't either get sicker than they already were or cause other people to be sick. So we had been up there, I don't know, 30, 45 minutes. And, we're doing EVP sessions, which stands for electronic voice phenomenon. So you're basically asking questions. You've got recorders going. You're trying to see if you get responses. And so we were kind of like, okay, it was hot. It was summertime. There's no heat or no air up there and no windows open. So, we're like, all right, let's go back down and take a break. And before we had gone up there, one of my teammates was like, I don't want to go. I don't feel right about this. I feel bad. It just, my gut's telling me, something's going to happen. And the other interesting thing is the other person with me, she had a hearing issue, but she could hear EVPs. I couldn't hear them, but with her hearing issue, probably with her hearing aids, she could actually hear them. So if she ever called out something, we'd try to pay attention to it because she would hear things that we could not. So keep in mind, I'm behind her and I'm like, okay, well, why don't we go? And she doesn't really hear me. And she's first, the other person's second, and I'm in the back. I've got my camera going. And all of a sudden, I felt a hand on my back. And it
Oh
wasn't like
boy.
this. So it wasn't like this thing pushed me. It was more like, Rob, you could probably relate if you have a spouse where maybe when you're in a crowded room, you might put your hand on their back to kind of lead them through a crowd or whatever,
Right. Or
that's
just
kind
letting them know you're there, just kind of
of
that.
it was kind of more like that, like, hey, I'm behind you, but it was a little urgent. And I felt like we needed to get out of there. So, again, as I'm saying, we had to go up a spiral staircase to get there. And Annette was the person who couldn't hear very well. I'm going, Annette, let's go, let's get out of here. And she couldn't hear me because I'm behind her.
Oh, geez.
So she's just la 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 la, and I'm going, no, we need to go. And my voice is getting more and more urgent. When we got down to the bottom of the stairs, you could go two ways to the chapel, or you could turn the way that would take you back into the administration side, which is where like Brooks was here, room was over there, and the warden's room.
Sure,
So
sure.
so we decided we were going to go that way. But as my camera catches the heads above the two people in front of me, there is a black shape or a black mass. I don't know how else to describe it. It's funny, you couldn't see through it, but you could. And it literally went over their heads, went across the threshold. And when you stop it, go frame by frame, you can see through it, but you can see that it's solid black. Again, it's hard to explain, but it went towards the chapel and we went the other way.
Oh,
So
good choice.
so it took me a little while to the feeling of, if you've ever been around somebody, the way I always kind of describe it is like in Harry Potter, you've got the Dementors, and when they come into the scene, everybody's life starts getting sucked out of them and they feel it. If you've ever been around a negative person, keep in mind we were in a prison. We were
Yeah.
females in a male prison. And most of those people probably didn't do things that they should have, and that's what put them in there in the first place, right? So, so the way I took it is this person wanted us to leave. It was our time to exit scene, if that makes sense.
Yep.
And so that negative feeling just stayed with me for a while. I'm kind of getting goosebumps actually talking to you about it. And I actually had to go outside, and someone that I learned early on from told me, if you have an experience like that, go outside and do something that makes you feel good, even if it's singing like Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. So that's what I did. I went outside, I sat under a tree and sang a little song to kind of break that mentality, because whatever it was just, and I'm not saying it was demonic, because again, we were in a prison. It was not a good person. And
Yeah.
you could,
Something wasn't right there, but it doesn't mean it was a demon.
right. And the whole reason that I had gone up there in the first place, because we had actually asked about it, because most people don't, I guess. Well, a group a couple weeks before we had been there had claimed they had seen uh, a disembodied head up there. So I was like, clearly there's been activity. Let's go up and see if we can document it. So that was probably my most profound experience. It took me about 3 years after that before I would go back to a jail or prison. And since I've been to Missouri State Penitentiary and a few other jails. But it was something that you just kind of have to experience it. But it's something I will never forget. And it is something that I share in one of the programs we do, where I know things happen that you cannot explain, because I cannot
Yeah.
explain. People were like, maybe it was a bat. No, because you would have seen its wings move, and you don't see its wings movement. And this thing was so close to me, I would have been able to see like the veins in a bat's wings. That's
Right, right. Well, and also the feeling on your back. I mean,
right,
the
right,
way you describe it, I know exactly what that feeling is. And if there isn't somebody standing there, I've never experienced it when there wasn't somebody standing there. You
right.
know what I mean?
Kind of like, you feel like someone's behind you looking at you, kind of feeling the hairs on the back of your neck go up. But
Yep.
this was definitely not a good, I call it an entity, but it wasn't good. Clearly it had been there at that prison and felt that women shouldn't be in its space, is kind of how I took it.
Right, like angry energy or something going on
Exactly,
there.
exactly.
Did you ever have after one of these events feel like something followed you home?
We did. There's a place in Rockford, Illinois. It's called Tinker Swiss Cottage, and we've investigated it many, many, many times. And it was on one of the ghost hunter shows, and we had similar experiences that they had had when they had been there. And so it was in December, and it was a cold night. And while we were setting up, we had heard noises, but we couldn't really tell what they were. But later, when we go back and listen to the audio, it sounds like little kids playing outside, but it was cold that day. So there weren't little kids playing outside. Plus, Tinker is far enough away from a neighborhood, kids don't play there. However, from the research, we found out that kids would get invited to a wealthy man. It was his summer home, which if you get into this field much, Rob, you'll find out that a lot of wealthy people had summer homes that were like a half-hour drive for us today, but for them, that was their summer home. So anyway, it was he would invite the neighborhood kids over for ice cream. So we hadn't heard about that story just yet about the ice cream, and we hadn't heard the audio yet of the kids giggling and stuff. So on the way home, it's just me and one other person. And as we're driving down the road, we get near what used to be a nunnery, where nuns would go for training, and they would maybe be housed there till they would get their placement.
Sure.
But it doesn't exist anymore. Now it's no longer there in that location. It hasn't been for years. And right as we get about to that spot in the center of the highway that made us both look and swerve the car, we swore we saw something standing there.
Yeah.
And it was like white and kind of glowing. And we were like, what the heck? And so it was to the point where I actually said like prayers afterwards. And like, okay, if you followed us home, it's time for you to go back.
Yeah, right.
And,
right.
We weren't quite home yet, but it's time for you to go back. You can't come on with us. So yeah, we've had that happen a couple of times. And there's a few things, Rob, we do. Like we learned at Waverly that if you ring a bell, that breaks the connectivity any spirit might have had with you. And we found that works pretty well. But I've also found just talking to them, a lot of times they just go. So we haven't had something that come and stuck around for a long time. It was just short periods of time immediately after we got back.
Yeah. Yeah, I had an experience I don't know if I've ever talked about on here, but something was messing with the lights, and I was downstairs and I kept walking through this cold spot. I mean, I'm giving a thumbnail sketch of this thing, but at that point I had never experienced anything, and it was clearly something going on. And I did the same thing. I talked to it to say like, okay, we're going to leave, and sorry we disturbed you, and like the whole thing. And it made me feel better at least. And nothing followed me. And it's funny because the same location we were in, it was a baby store in St. Paul, Minnesota. My wife worked there. And when you mentioned the kids, it's funny. I just told the story this weekend. I came to pick her up, and this house was haunted. It was in a house. And they'd always talk about all these little weird things. And I came to pick her up. She's closing. And I'm at the back of the store, and I go, no, you can't close yet. There's kids upstairs. I can hear kids talking, laughing, running back and forth. Kind of sounded like I heard an adult voice. My wife goes, there's nobody here. I'm like, no, I hear them. She goes, you're hearing something. So there was only one staircase. I went up that staircase. I mean, it was in clear view. Nobody could have gotten past either one of us. Empty room. I even looked under the beds. I'm like, come on. It was set up like a children's room. I'm looking under the beds going, somebody has to be up here. It was the clearest sound. So yeah, when you said the kids were out there, I'm like, oh, I know that. And I know that feeling afterwards.
Yeah.
It's a rough one.
Well, and I don't get shaken easy. That's why the whole thing at that prison was pretty, profound for me, because
sure.
Normally it's like, even if something followed me home, it doesn't really scare me, but this did.
Yeah.
So that was like, okay, this is different than normal.
Yeah, like I said, that was the only experience I'd ever had, and it did spook me, and I'm not easily spooked, but that one, it was the cold spots. I mean, it was like walking into a 1 foot of Alaska. It's like, boom, I went, whoa, what is this? And why are the lights doing this? And then when I went to the fuse box, everything was on. I'm like, are the lights on? They go, oh, they just came back on. I'm looking at it going, this is, yeah, okay, I'm going to leave now. Thank you, everybody. It's a little weird. So, yeah. Here's a question for you. You've kind of lived all over. What's the most haunted area that you think you've been in?
Oh wow. Each location kind of had its own different types of hauntings. So like, here a lot of people report stuff around the Civil War and or homes tied to the Civil War.
Sure. Yeah, I hear that one a lot.
Chicago, think about it. You got everything from mobsters to uh, we one business we investigated. They were within a block of three different cemeteries, and so is that the reason why they were having experiences? You know what I mean? So it's like
Yeah,
all over. I mean, I would say because Chicago's bigger, obviously Chicago's had probably more things than other places, and I can't say if it's just because it's more haunted or if it's just larger than the other places I've lived. But each just kind of had its own thing. As in Florida, a lot of the stuff there is either Native American tied or plantation based. One of the towns we investigated that had two or three locations that were haunted, they had done orange groves, but they had a period where the freezing rain or freezing temperatures back in the early 1900s killed all their crops, and so they replaced it with celery. So a lot of the sharecroppers and things like that they had used to help, we believe, were haunting a couple of the locations. So it just really depends on the location.
sure.
Waverly Hills was a tuberculosis sanatorium, so they claim they've had tens of thousands of deaths there. So I just think it really just depends on the area, and you'll see different activity based on the area that you're in. And because I believe a lot of it is energy that's imprinted, it's probably based on the types of events that happen that either cause tragedy or joy in people's lives. And so I would say probably Chicago only because of its size, I guess, compared to the others.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree with you on Chicago. I always think, I mean, Chicago burned to the ground.
Yep.
So you've got a lot there. There's a lot of history and a lot of tragedy. And then, like you mentioned, the cemeteries, like Graceland Cemetery, that's a big deal up here.
Yeah.
What is it? Roseville,
Rosewood, I think.
Rosewood. I mean,
Well, and Melrose
wow.
Park, isn't it Melrose Park that has like more cemetery? There's more dead people that live in Melrose Park than alive people because they're all in cemeteries. I
I,
mean,
I,
that's
I think that's it. And then there's Bachelor's Grove here too, which I know
yes.
people that have been there that have come back and said, I was just going for a run. What the hell did I see there? Like, yeah, there's a lot of weird
Yeah.
stuff. We used to own
Def-
a baby store in Lincoln Park, and around there, we were a block away from the Biograph, which is where Dillinger was shot. And we heard stories all the time about people seeing things around there until they closed up that alley. Then they said it kind of died down. But
yeah.
up the street was a place called the Red Lion Pub, and it was considered for a while the most haunted restaurant in Chicago. And I talked to people that worked there, and they had, oh my God, the stories. And it was always like after hours, glasses flying off shelves, things moving, chairs getting stacked. And I'm like, really? And they're like, if you're queasy, don't work here. I'm like, oh boy, big time
Well, and,
stuff.
and like the Excalibur, I don't even know if they're still open anymore, but that was where they took a lot of the bodies from not only the Chicago fire, but also when the Eastland disaster happened, when it turned over and all those people drowned. And so, same with Marshall Fields, which is now Macy's. They took a lot of bodies there because they didn't have the morgues to carry for that many people. And people have had activity around there. Oprah
Yeah.
Winfrey studio, there was always rumors that she had caught something on tape that she'll never show anyone. And people claim that they've seen things around her studio. Well, again, that's real close to where the Eastland incident happened. And so, when you have that many people die, they were on their way to an exciting thing. It was a company party. And when they drowned, right there, that's a lot of stuff happening at one time.
It's a lot of stuff. Yeah, it is. All right. I'm going to ask you a different question, one that you might
Okay.
not have been asked before. What is your favorite, like, paranormal book? What's the one it's your go-to?
It's actually a book by his name's Paul Browning, and it's just kind of like investigation 101. It's kind of some of the simple do's and don'ts. Everything through, making sure you have a piece of paper in your pocket. I mean, I know a lot of us now, it's cell phones, everything, and people make notes there, but I still try to carry a paper with me in case, I need it for something. And a lot of the things about audio I learned from reading that book about people don't realize how much they talk to themselves when they're doing things, and that gets picked up by recorders. And if you don't have a recorder close to you, it might sound paranormal for somebody that's reviewing a recorder that's like 3 or 4, rooms over or something. So I learned a lot from his book, for learning how, to be a basics of the investigation. And then I think the second one, was written by David Roundtree, and his goes into more of the scientific things. And I learned a lot more about some of the tools and techniques to use for, like, not just recorders, but maybe making sure your EMFs do this way. Or he even thinks that there's radiation that happens when these activity is going on. He recommends people wear like a little detector, and if radiation starts coming off, maybe leave the area, because it's possibly could be harmful to you. So those are probably the two biggest ones, and again, they're more technology based than anything else.
Oh, they're great suggestions. So I just wrote both of them down because I know that people are going to ask, and I know a lot of people that are really interested in, ghost hunting, getting involved in groups, and I think they'd be fascinated by those books. So that brings us to our final thing here. Where can people find you? Is TNT something they can join, or you tell me what's the best way for people to get in touch with you and to kind of get involved in this?
Sure. So yeah, we have a website, www.tntparanormal.com. And we have Facebook. It's TNT Paranormal Investigators, or you can look me up, Melissa Tanner, and I would have TNT listed as one of my employment. We do have Instagram. I'll be honest, I don't keep it updated as often as I do. We have Twitter. I don't keep it updated hardly any at all now. Unfortunately, it just doesn't seem to have a lot of viewers for the type of activity that I'm, putting out there. But they can email me directly. They can call me. My number is 630-776-3610. It is a Chicago number, but I am in Southwest Missouri. And if, we're always looking for good people that want to join a team. And we do have a pretty decent training program too. If you're somebody that's like, I don't even know, I haven't done anything before. We have a pretty decent training program. I'm always looking for people that are interested in doing research. All the research can be done remotely. And we always are looking for data reviewers. That is people that don't go to the investigations, but they watch the video and listen to audio when we're done.
Fantastic. I'll also put that in the show notes so people can find you that way as well. But Melissa, thank you so much. It was an honor talking to you. This was a lot of fun. Who knows? Maybe we'll invite you back at some point.
Yeah, that would be great. I would love it.
Well, good. Then it will happen. And then maybe we could get your friend on that grew up in the haunted house. I'd love to hear some of those stories. So, Melissa, again, thank you so much.
Thank you.